topic of feedback and delivering feedback, it is one of the most common tactical questions that leaders of all levels ask us all the time. This topic comes up often. How do I deliver feedback? How do I get my managers to give better feedback? How do I create a feedback culture? What is that? Feedback is something that comes up often because feedback is about things that need to be adjusted. Whether this is a formal feedback moment, your performance review, or the second time you've come into the office, or if it's something that's happening organically all the time, regularly in rhythms, it's all about a discrepancy, something that needs to be adjusted, oftentimes about performance, something that somebody might not see or might not know that you're going to be bringing to their attention. So to make this real for you, could you write down really quickly, when was the last time that you needed to provide feedback to someone on something that they needed to have adjusted? This could be personal or professional. Just write it down, have something real in mind. When was the last time you had to give somebody feedback about something that you perceived that they needed to adjust? Webster defines feedback this way. I love Webster's dictionary. It's just a great way to get something level set. The transmission of evaluative or corrective information about an action, event, or process to the original or controlling source. Evaluative or corrective information. I think Webster's nails it. That might be the heart of why this is difficult to do. And by the way, there's a whole nother topic on positive feedback, on affirmation, and why we need at least 5 or 8 pieces of positive feedback for every piece of corrective feedback. That's a deeper conversation if you want to go into that. We did a session on noise versus feedback in spring in one of our prior series. And so Claire will get that link for you. But the conversation, when a leader comes to me and says, I need help figuring out feedback, what they're not usually saying is, help me learn how to affirm my people more often. What they're usually saying is, I'm struggling to give corrective feedback, or I've got a moment coming up. That's why it's so difficult. And so I'm going to ask you another question. I want to make this personal. It's one of my convictions that when we think about investing in people or developing people or giving people feedback, if we can make it personal and think about what it's like for us, it can help shape the way we do it more effectively for other people. So here's the question I want you to think about for yourself. What would change if you regularly received honest, challenging feedback about your development, your strengths, and your weaknesses? What would change if you received regular, honest, and challenging feedback about your development, your strengths, and your weaknesses? As we get into this, I hope that you can metabolize it for yourself as a way to then be more effective in delivering it to others. So I want to do this. I want to share 3 big ideas to stir the pot a little bit, and then I'm going to get practical because I know some of you are going, Daniel, I came for a framework, so if you just give me big ideas, I'm going to be upset. I don't want to make you upset. I like you. So I'm going to give you 3 big ideas to stir the pot and then give you 1 practical framework as a way of taking this forward. Here's the first big idea. Does feedback help or does it hurt? We make an assumption all the time that when we talk about feedback, we're often talking about performance. We make an assumption that feedback, anytime there's feedback, it's actually going to help performance. The interesting thing is that the research, and there's decades on it, suggests that 1/3 of the time, feedback does more harm than good. 1/3 of the time, feedback actually hurts more than it helps. So let's think about when you receive feedback or if somebody else receives feedback, how can you respond? There's really 4 ways. The first is that somebody helps you become aware of a discrepancy, or you help somebody else become aware. So this is where you are, this is where you need to be, and whatever that is, a behavior, an attitude, an action. And so one option is change your behavior and raise your performance. You eliminate the discrepancy by doing more and trying harder, by getting better. That's one possibility. I think that's what we're hoping most people do. I show you the gap, you close the gap. Another possibility that can also be positive is that you might change the standard. So maybe you give somebody feedback and they say, thank you for just showing the discrepancy. Here's the reasons the discrepancy is there. And you realize actually, we have an unrealistic standard. We need to adjust the standard. It becomes a mini negotiation. Sometimes it's a combination. You're going to raise performance and lower the standard. Either way, those are some positive outcomes for feedback. But we're usually hoping people change. That's what we want to do. There's a couple of other possibilities. You might give somebody feedback and either they're not ready for it, they don't want it, or they just don't care. And so they might reject the feedback. Thank you for that. I'm going to choose to ignore what you said. Maybe they'll say something like, oh, thank you for that, but they're really going to ignore it. Or in some situations, maybe the feedback is too much to hold, or they're burnt out, or there's more variables, things happening in the whole story of their life that they just ghost. They abandon the situation, they escape, and they disappear. So a third of the time, feedback might actually hurt more than it helps. So what does it look like for us to move towards feedback that helps? One example of this that's super common is 360 surveys. These have become super popular. We have a suite of 10 assessments. Weekly, people ask me if I have a 360 survey, and we don't for a number of reasons. One of them is that there are so many 360 surveys out there that we don't need to create just another one. But there's some other reasons too. And if, by the way, you're saying, what is a 360 survey? This is a situation where, let's say I work with 10 of you, and I'm going to get some developmental feedback, maybe performance feedback. And so 10 of you are going to go into an online portal. You're going to fill out a form with some questions about me. It's going to be anonymous. So I'm never going to know who you are. Maybe I know who the 10 people are, but I don't know what your specific feedback is. And then it's going to get collated together. A coach or a manager, someone's going to sit with me and walk through, this is what your peers or your boss or the people who work with or for you think about you, with the hope of opening up self-awareness, creating possibilities, helping me understand where I need to move. It's a good idea in concept, and there are some places it actually really works, and just as many places where it actually hurts more feedback than it helps, and that's a whole nother conversation. But when I stop and think about 360s, and I've seen a lot of them go really well, and I've seen a lot of them go sideways, one of the questions I stop and ask myself is, why do we even need anonymous 360 feedback mechanisms? And the thing I come back to is, I think we need them because so many of us struggle to have honest, direct conversations of love and truth. And if we were having those, would we really need an anonymous 360 survey if I was actually getting input about my blind spots? Interesting to think about. Another thing is, do we like to give feedback more, or are we more interested in receiving feedback or giving it? It's rare that a leader comes to me and says, I'm trying to figure out how I can request and receive more effective feedback. I want to solicit feedback better. People will come and say, I want to create a feedback culture. Tell me how to deliver it. And so we often make the assumption that other people have the developmental gap that needs to be adjusted, but how willing are we to receive it? This is an unrealistic ideal, but imagine what would change if every single leader, instead of delivering feedback, was requesting feedback, receiving feedback, and then in a trickle-down effect, people started to ask for feedback as well. If every person in an organization was asking for feedback, would we need the mandatory feedback training for managers that's going to suddenly solve all of our problems? Maybe not. So sometimes we start with giving when maybe we should start with receiving. And then another challenge that's out there is that we think of feedback as this one-time intervention, this moment that happens. Here's a tough conversation. I got to muster up for it. I'm going to make it happen. And maybe feedback is more effective if it was part of the regular rhythms of what we do, if it wasn't this big scary event, it was just something that happens. On our team, when we all put you in our breakout, I'm going to get some feedback on my session on feedback with you all. It's going to be like meta feedback, but we've built it in as a rhythm of what happens. And so it's interesting. I'm looking forward to it. I know they're going to tell me a few things I did well and a few things I could do to improve, but it's become so regular and rhythmic to what we do that's not a big scary moment. I'm not going to get called into the office again. Okay, so those are some big ideas. I hope that's stirring the pot for you. I'm going to get tactical. Don't let go of those big ideas, but let's get tactical and look at some of the things the research says. I'm going to give you one tactical framework. I call it the ACT framework. When it comes to feedback, let's act. Let's do something. Don't hold it to yourself. And so there's three pieces with this: the approach, approaching the person with truth and love, carrying out or coaching them with specific feedback that addresses the task or the behavior, not the person, and then a transition to a next steps, an action plan, some sort of wrap up. So this approach, this is maybe one of the most important things. We often fumble over our words. We want to get the framework. We want to have the right formula, but the approach is one of the most important things. One of the things I pray for my kids regularly when I say bedtime prayers with them is that they will become people who are both tough and tender, tough in life and tender in love and with people. And when it comes to feedback, our approach, my hope is that we can approach people with a bit of toughness, like we're going to give you some truth, but so much tenderness that people know we're actually in it for them, because the hope is that they actually receive the feedback and don't just reject it or disappear. Some of us lean more towards that toughness. If you've gone through our Leading Under Pressure inventory, you're going to join us for real-time coaching to unpack that today. We call it the truth speaker. This is a person who's going to bring the hammer. Time for feedback. I've got a feedback sandwich for you. By the way, nobody likes a feedback sandwich. It doesn't taste very good. Positive, negative, positive. People want it truthful, but we also want to know that the person cares about me. This is what we often call the peacekeeper. And so approaching somebody in a way that's going to preserve their dignity, that's going to care about them as a person, but still be honest about places that they might need to change and grow. A number of years ago, I had a woman I was working with who was working for me. And this was a situation where we had multiple corrective conversations, and then the big one was coming up. And normally I'm a pretty patient person. I get along with most people, and this person just pressed all my buttons. And so I was ready to go in there and drop the hammer. And I'm not a drop the hammer type of person, if you know me. And I went to a mentor and I said, this is how I'm going to approach this. And he paused me. I'm glad he did. And he said, you know what? I think you should postpone that conversation until you can treat her like a person and actually care about her as a person, because right now you just want to drop the hammer on her. And so you're not even going to come at this with care. And that was helpful for me because I had to do a little bit of heart work to be able to approach her and realize that, yes, there's some things I need to change for the organization, but ultimately I want to care about her as a person. And that approach, the way we approach the person with care and concern, makes a big difference in whether they'll receive it or not. And then how do we carry it out? A couple key things. Carry it out with clear, specific examples. If we bring ambiguity, well, you kind of do this thing. If it's not clear, I'm not going to act on it, or I might not even see that there's a need to act. So focusing on something specific, a specific example, hopefully it's representative of a pattern if we're coming to them, and then displaying what are the consequences, what's the impact or the implications for them and for other people. Sometimes I don't act on feedback because I just don't think it's a big deal. And others might be the same way. So when I get to the opportunity to see, oh, this is the impact of my actions on you, I didn't realize that, I might be more inclined to actually receive and act on that feedback. And so that's part of approaching it with specifics in a way that the person is going to receive it for themselves, and then transition it to the future piece, some goals, a little bit of planning. Okay, so here's what I need from you next. Let's check in at this time next week, or the next time we have one of those meetings. Let's have a conversation afterwards, or next time in our monthly meeting, I want to revisit where this is. So there's a feedback loop to come back around. So being able to approach them with truth and love, carrying it out with specific feedback that honors the person, and then transition to some next steps. A couple little tidbits to throw in there. One is, and I alluded to it earlier, is it can be helpful if we have an event, a feedback moment, to practice and share it with somebody objective who's not going to be emotional about the process. A feedback buffer is what I like to call them. They're going to take the feedback, they're going to receive it, they have no skin in the game, and then they can say, you know what, this might be received this way. Okay, so I'm getting feedback on how I might deliver my feedback. Because ultimately, if there's something that needs to change, I want it to change. I don't want them to reject it or just disappear. That doesn't help anybody. And then I'm going to give one tip for the truth speaker, one tip for the peacekeeper. For the truth speaker, the person who you know what, I've done this so much, it's become automatic. You got a need for feedback, I will come in. Good cop, bad cop, I'm the bad cop. If you're bad cop, practicing thinking about that person as a person, what their needs are, their motivations, their challenges, what's going on in their life. It might feel awkward at first, but eventually that will become part of your automatic processing as well. To think about, how do I care about the person, even if I'm delivering something that they absolutely need to hear? It's not going to feel better, but I want them to receive it. I want them to know that I'm there still. And for the peacekeeper, it can be helpful to think about, what are the things I can actually control? A lot of leaders, if you get into a deeper coaching conversation, some of the resistance we have to delivering feedback is because we want people to like us. And it's just uncomfortable to deliver harsh, critical, even if it's honest and needed feedback, our perceptions of it at least. And so sometimes it can be helpful to remember, my goal, what I can control is how I deliver it, how I care for the person, how specific I am. Have I thought it through? What I cannot control is how they're going to respond. In fact, that's not my responsibility. That's theirs. I want to do the best I can to set them up for success. And I might even prepare myself for defensiveness, kind of shore myself up a little bit. But ultimately, it's theirs to receive and then take or leave. Feedback, it comes up all the time because it has the potential to improve our performance. And performance matters. Your performance in your work matters for you and for other people, because you're hopefully getting stuff done for the sake of the people that your product, service, nonprofit, whatever mission you're on is doing. It touches people in some way. And so improving our performance matters. But back to my earlier question, what would change for you personally if you were receiving regular, honest, challenging feedback about your development, your strengths, and your weaknesses? And when we can pause and put ourselves in the other person's shoe, and maybe even start requesting feedback more than just we give it out, we can then start to put frameworks and tools and tactics and tips in place, approaching people in a way that we can carry out with specificity, honor them, and together move to the future with a little bit more clarity and being on the same page, honoring the person the whole way through. So hope that stirs the pot and gives you some ideas. Let's go talk.